Okay, I'm going to pick up this morning again on the study that we began on a couple of weeks ago. I really didn't intend this to go into the New Year's, but I guess it's going to. And this is God's 10 rules for financial success. Something that we, especially with the political climate being the way that it is, we're not really certain which direction things are going to go. We know they're going to go left. They've been going left since I was a little kid, with respites along the way. But you know, even when you get somebody that's a Republican in office, they're still so much farther left than they were years ago. I look at the policies of John Kennedy. Now, when I was a kid, John Kennedy was a far left-wing, bleeding heart liberal. But if you look at his fiscal policy today, you would think he's a right-wing conservative. And that's basically how far we have moved over the years, to the point to where now you talk about somebody that's conservative and they are so much left of where they would have been 50 years ago. Something that Elder Gerald used to teach about dialectical materialism, the idea of moving an entire mass of humanity in a certain direction, and yet it takes so long and it goes so slow that you hardly even see it until you get way down at the other end and look back at it and realize, wow, we were way over there and now we're way over here and we didn't even feel like we moved. It just happened. So these rules will put you in good stead regardless of what comes, regardless of what we end up with on January 21st or whenever it is, and by paying close attention to these and applying these, then they'll help you through whatever may come its way. Now, we got through the first two of these last week, or 2 weeks ago, and the first one, number one, obey God. That is the first rule. You have to obey God. You know, you're kind of up against the 8 ball as it is. Once we come out public and Satan knows who we are, since he's the guy that's pretty much running things unless God overrules him when it comes to finances in this world, you're already his enemy. He already wants to squash you like a bug. If he can do it, he'll do it. So for your own defense, obey God. God's more powerful than Satan, and he can overrule him. And he can take care of you, but he expects you to obey him. So rule number one, we covered this 2 weeks ago, obey God. That's the first rule in everything that you do, whether it be financial or otherwise. Rule number two, pay God first. The first use of income has to be to pay God back. And we covered this one in detail last week as well. And understand that since we have 10 rules here, so if you're going to obey God and they're God's rules, then you have to obey all 10 of them, right? You can't say, well, okay, I like 1 and I like 6. I'll do those. Maybe 7 on occasion. Well, that's not obeying God. If you're going to obey God, you've got to obey all of them. And if you slip, which sometimes happens, then get down on your knees, ask God for forgiveness, get up and dust yourself off and start walking again. And if you make a mistake, okay, you make a mistake. If you sin, you sin. Apologize for it. You know, that's one of the hardest things for a prideful man to do, is just to say, I'm sorry. That's one of the hardest things to ever do, whether it be in personal relationships or whether it be before God. One of the hardest things for a prideful person to do, and we all have this, is to just say, you know what, I messed up. I was wrong. I'm sorry. But do it. If you slip, do it. And do better the next time. Okay? So rule 1, obey God. Rule 2, pay God first. Rule number 3, and this one's going to may surprise some people. Pay yourself second. Pay yourself. There's a little book that I read many, many years ago called The Richest Man in Babylon. Probably some of the soundest advice that I got outside of the Bible when it comes to how to deal with finances. And one of his premises was this: you pay God first and then you pay yourself. You think about it, you're down here for 60, 70, 80, maybe 90 years. At the end of that 90 years, what have you got to show for it? If you just spend everything that you've got, at the end of that, what have you got to show for it? God expects us to follow the examples of ants, and we're going to see this in a couple of minutes when we turn to the Bible. They're not sluggards. They work and they save, and God expects us to save. There was a recent study that was done that showed that 19% of Americans don't save anything. 19% don't save anything. 5% or less, or 21% save 5% or less of their income. And when I say saving, I'm referring to all forms of saving, whether that be a 401k at your employer, whether that be in a personal savings, whether it be in investments, whatever it is. 21% save less than 5%. 25% save 6 to 10%. Another 7% refused to answer the question, and 1% claimed they didn't have any income. So that's 73% of Americans save less than 10% of their income. 73%. Now, we live in a society where it used to seem to make more sense to save because you could actually get interest. You could actually put your money, even if you just put it in a bank, you get 6-7% interest on it, where nowadays that's not available. And I think part of that is because the government wants us to avoid savings. They don't want us to save. They want us to be in debt, which is going to be another rule that we're going to get to after we get through this one. But saving is not a recommendation. It's not a suggestion. It's a commandment of Almighty God. I want you to turn to Proverbs chapter 6. Where Solomon teaches us to learn this principle from the ants. Proverbs chapter 6, verses 6 through 8. Go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways and be wise, which having no guide, overseer, or ruler, provideth her meat in the summer and gathereth her food in the harvest. Putting things back, saving. Now, I mean, we talk in terms of dollars and cents, because we don't live in the type of an agricultural society that many used to live in at the time that the Bible was being written. A lot of these people, they didn't change things into money, but to have crops. You remember one time I was in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and we had friends that lived there, and we went out into the country, and you would see all these huge silos. You don't see them around here because we don't have farms like that, but in Wisconsin, they had all those gigantic red silos, and I think it was that if they had an American flag painted on them, that meant they had them paid off. And so people would store grain or whatever in those. Well, that's a form of savings, so that you have that to fall back on. Crystal has, from time to time, cows that she slaughters, and that's a form of savings. It's just not dollars and cents. So, I mean, there are a lot of different ways of dealing with this, but the fact of not just using everything you've got and ending up with an empty cupboard and nothing to fall back on. That's what God is referring to as being a sluggard here. Look at Proverbs chapter 30 and verse 25. The answer of people not strong, yet they prepare their meat in the summer. They get ready for things. When the harvest is good, they prepare for it to help them get through the winter. My father grew up as a farmer, and they would work from spring all the way until the harvest. Well, then in the winter, there wasn't much they could do. Have they not saved up enough to make it through the winter? Well, then they would starve to death that year until the next spring rolled around. And for generations, that's the way things were. We don't think of it that way because we don't live in that type of a lifestyle. But since we're dealing with dollars and cents, put it back. When times are good, that's the time to really get serious and diligent about saving. You think about Joseph. You remember that Joseph, when Pharaoh came to him, he'd had a dream, and Joseph explained that you're going to have 7 years of good, then you're going to have 7 years of want. And so put back for the 7 years of good, and you'll be in much better shape during the 7 years when you don't have anything. And that's the way things happen. Things are cyclical in this world. So when things are rough, it's a little rougher. When you have times of plenty, that's the time to really bear down on this, not start living high on the hog, but put back for the times when it's going to get rough again, because it will. That's one thing we can know from history. It will repeat itself. In Proverbs chapter 27 and verse 12, we read, "A prudent man foreseeth the evil and hideth himself, but the simple pass on and are punished." So saving is a way to hide yourself from the coming evil. Again, when the times are good, that's the time to put back what you can. And fools can't save and have nothing. And at the end of think of, for those of you that are younger, think 50 years from now. Do you want to be in the same position you are today? Or do you want to have something that you put back that you can then pass on to your children and hopefully on to their children? A good man passes an inheritance down to his family. You don't do that by not saving. You can't count on the idea of overnight success and overnight millions. That doesn't work in God's system. Look at Proverbs chapter 27 and verse 24. "For riches are not forever, and doth the crown endure to every generation." We're not always going to have times that are good. Now, one thing that you need to understand, and that is that saving has to be a priority in life. You cannot look at it from a standpoint of at the end of the month, whatever I've got left over, I'm going to save it. You can't do that. There won't be anything left over. There just isn't. It's the same when it comes to giving, to paying to God. You don't wait until the end of the month and see what's left. There won't be anything left. Just like work will expand to fill the time that's available for it, you all know that. You have a project that you have to get done, you've got a deadline on it, you're looking at it and you're thinking, oh, this is a piece of cake. And you know what? It'll take right up to the deadline in order to get it finished. Work will expand to make sure that you don't have any time available. And expenses will expand to take every single penny that you've got if you're not careful. That's why you pay God first. First fruits. That's why you save first. You put back something before the expenses have the chance to eat at them. Okay? And if you don't make a commitment, it's not going to get done. It won't just happen. This has to be something that you absolutely planned with this, just plan to do it. Now, in some cases, some folks might have debt. And paying off debt is important, as we'll see when we get down to some of the other rules. So you may not be able to put back a full 10% while you're paying debt off, but put something back, even if it's half that. Take the 10% and schedule it for savings, and then use part of it to pay the debt off so that you don't have the debt. But get in the habit of always taking your first 10% to God, the second 10% to you. You deserve earning something out of this. For all the years of sweat and toil and deprivation that you go through, at the end of your life, there should be something there. You should be able to lean back and say, well, I've at least got this that I can pass down to the next generation. Besides that, there's an old rule. My father was able to do this. He lived on half of what he made. He'd come through the Depression. He was one of those guys, and as a result, he saved more than you could ever imagine, because he knew what it was like to be poor. And he lived off half of what he made. I remember he used to want a Porsche. He had a Volkswagen, and he wanted a Porsche. And I was thinking, Dad, why don't you just go buy the Porsche? You got the money. I mean, he never made huge money, but he made good money for the time. I mean, he's been gone now for over 30 years, I think. But even at the time, I think he was knocking down about $75,000 a year. That was good money back then. He could easily afford the payments on a Porsche. Wouldn't do it. Wouldn't do it. If I can't write the check for it, I'm not buying it. And that's the way my dad was. And as a result, when my father passed away, my mother was 9 years younger than him. My father retired. They forced him into retirement, I think, when he was about 67 years old, and my mother decided to retire shortly thereafter, within a month or so of my dad's retirement. And she lived off of their savings from that moment until she finally passed away. And when she passed away, there was still money. There was still money in the annuities. There was still money in the bank, basically. And so a man that had a normal job, that worked 5 days a week, just like everybody else's dad did, ended up being able to provide not only for his wife to live the rest of her life without ever having to lift a finger and work, but also provided for his children. And he did it by living off of half of what he made. If you can get to the situation where you can live off half your income, then it's real easy to take the first 10% and give it to God. It's real easy to take the next 10% and put that back in savings. It's real easy to pay the bills off. And it's an easier way, it's just an easier way to live than to always be right here and wonder how we're going to get through this next one. And savings is how this works. And let your savings accumulate. Let it grow. Don't use it short of an absolute emergency. There used to be a rule. I guess the rule is still there. It's just that you're going to have to find some other form of investment in order for it to make any sense. And that's called the Rule of 72. The Rule of 72 says that if you divide 72 by the annual rate of return, that will give you an idea of how long it will take for your money to double. And I remember my mother and father saying that some of the annuities that they had, the money in there would double every 7 years based off the interest that they were getting. So, I mean, you think about that. You take $100,000 and put it into an account that's going to get you, say, 8%, and every 9 years it's going to double. Well, you start off when you're 30 years old with $100,000, and in 9 years, when you're 39 years old, you have 200,000, and in another 9 years, you have 400,000, and you haven't done anything other than make that initial investment to start with in savings. Let it grow. Let the interest compound on it, and understand the higher the interest, the higher the risk. But there are investments out there, there are things out there where you can still get a reasonable rate of return on them without using, you can't go to a bank. Used to be you could, but not anymore. You're just not going to get enough interest. But there are things that you can, there are ways of getting involved in different things that are relatively safe where you can make decent interest off of them. And one of the things that savings makes it possible for someone to take advantage of opportunities that come along when they come along that you can't take advantage of if you don't have any money in the bank. Sometimes when these deals come along and you would be able to jump in on them and do well, that requires cash. You're not going to have it if you don't save it. Okay? So that's rule number 3, pay yourself second. Rule number 4, minimize expenses. When I was with the Appraisal Institute, we hired a new chief financial officer. I think I'd only been there about a year, been on the board about a year at the time, and he came in. He had quite a reputation for being somebody that could run an organization that size. And almost immediately, he saved us $250,000 a year, like that. And I asked him, how in the world did you do that? What? He said, well, you know, when you go to the store and you pull out a credit card, a MasterCard or Visa or something like that, and you pay for something, and you pay $100 for something, you know the store doesn't get $100. They have to pay a percentage back to the store for being able to use that card, so that they may pay 3% back to the store. So you pay $100 for it, the store only gets 97, and MasterCard gets the other 3. Well, this was an organization that used MasterCards when people would take classes and such, and so he went in and renegotiated the fees with the bank as to what they would charge us because of the amount of activity that we had, and he got a deal that saved us $250,000 overnight, just by minimizing expenses. Look for areas where you can minimize your expenses. It's the same as saving money. If you've got a high interest card, you can transfer it to a lower interest card, then do so and get rid of the high interest and put that money back in your own pocket again rather than giving it to somebody else. In Proverbs chapter 18 and verse 9 says, he also that is slothful in his work is brother to him that's a great waster. Don't be wasteful. Don't have unnecessary outflows. And one of the main problems with the foolish man is his spending habits. Proverbs chapter 21 and verse 20 says, there is treasure to be desired and oil in the dwelling of the wise. You see, he saves things back. He hangs on to it. But a foolish man spendeth it up. The foolish spend everything they've got and don't even consider the fact that they can cut expenses. And one of the main reasons that people don't have savings is because of undisciplined spending. They spend too much. Now, if you take it off the top, you don't have it to spend. You see, I think one of the grave disservices that has happened, especially for people that work a job, is that they take your They withhold your taxes from your check. So you don't notice, you have no idea how much you're actually writing a check for. You don't realize how expensive that is when you just get used to living off of your paycheck, not realizing that every time you get a paycheck, there's a huge chunk of money that went to the federal government. Conversely, if you can do the same thing with your own savings so that you don't even notice it. I remember when Josh was in the Air Force, he had it set up to where a certain percentage of his check automatically went into an account somewhere. He never noticed it, but it was there. Okay? When it comes to your expenses, do the same. Make sure that you know what those expenses are. You know, I have to write check 4 times a year. I have to write estimated taxes to give to the government because that's the way things work in the world that I live in. And so I know how much I have to send them. So I do everything I can to limit that, to get that down as low as I possibly can. Whereas if it was just coming out of my check, I'd never pay any attention to it. And I'd end up paying more than if I actually sat there and had to write the check myself. Learn how to be a smart shopper. Here's some hints for you. Number 1, limit the opportunities that advertisers have to seduce you for their goods and services, because that's really what they're doing. I remember one of the favorite things that a lot of people used to do was go to the shopping mall and just walk them down. Well, if you go to the mall, you're going to spend money. You just are. They're going to get you. They're going to bring you in off of the street. You can end up spending money, even though you had no intention of spending something. You're going to end up spending money. Limit those opportunities. Don't find that as a form of Don't go to places for a form of entertainment where all you're going to do is walk out with a new pair of pants when you didn't need a new pair of pants to start with. Limit the ability for them to do that. Question sales. You know, there's so many times when it's really not a sale. They marked it up. Now they're going to mark it down and make it look like you're saving money on this. Be careful with that. Shop less. Now, during this pandemic, y'all have had to learn how to shop less, huh? Because you just can't go out like you used to. Most of the stores aren't even open. But when you go grocery shopping, make a list. Don't just walk through the aisles and go, oh, that looks good. Oh, I'll have 4 of these. Know what it is that you need. Don't go grocery shopping on an empty stomach. If you do, you will buy the store. Trust me, I've done it. Go in, get what you need. If you're not disciplined, then then don't carry a bunch of credit cards around with you. Just if you can't there's nothing wrong with having them. I've got a pocket full of them, but most of them don't have a balance on them. And the ones that do have a very small balance on them, and I use them for travel expenses and such. There's nothing wrong with having them. What the problem is when you have them and you got them charged all the way up to the hilt. If you can't control yourself when it comes to credit, avoid the credit. Get rid of the cards. Don't put yourself in that position. Don't be so proud that you have to buy brand new everything. You know, I don't think I've bought a brand new car in I don't know how many years. Probably close to 20 years now. Every one I buy now is a little bit used. I look for a deal, I find one low mileage, but I haven't bought new in a long time. And a few minutes comparing prices can save you a fortune. Just look at the difference. Is there really a difference between this brand and that brand? Is Starbucks really better than Folgers? Is there really a difference between these things? If there isn't, if it's negligible, then save what you can. Use doctors and dentists primarily for emergencies. Don't run to them every time you get a little scratch in your throat. You know, they're in business. They are business people. They are there to make money. They're not there to be altruistic. They're there for, now if you're sick, go see the doctor. If you need a doctor, go see him. But I can say this because my wife's not in the room. My in-laws are people that have made doctors wealthy because they go to the doc. I mean, it's constant. If they trim their fingernails too close, they run to the doctor to make sure and not get an. I mean, it's insane. Don't go to the doctor forever unless you're sick. If you're sick, use them for that. There's nothing wrong with going to the doctor when you're sick, but don't go all the time. Not if you're well. Use insurance to protect against catastrophic losses. Now this is one that I'm kind of a stickler on, and that is you should have health insurance. You really should have health insurance. Now it doesn't have to cover everything under the sun, but for catastrophic losses, you suffer a heart attack and end up in a hospital, and without it, you bankrupt your family. Years ago, back, I don't remember how many years ago now, but I had prostate cancer, and I had to have my prostate removed. And we had health insurance, of course, and we went into the hospital. When I came out of the hospital, I remember seeing some of the bills. And this was basically outpatient. I went in the morning. I was supposed to go home that night. I ended up in the ICU for a day, but the next day I went home, and the bill was $189,000 for the hospital. Now that didn't cover the doctor, that didn't cover the anesthesiologist, that didn't cover anything but the hospital, $189,000. And then I noticed that the insurance company had written them a check for slightly less than $10,000. And I thought at first, do I owe $179,000 here? So we contacted the insurance company and said, no, it's paid off. It's paid in full. So my next appointment with the doctor, I asked him, what in the world is this all about? I get a bill for $189, right? And the insurance company pays $10, and everybody's good with that? I don't understand. And he told me that there must be, for everybody in the room that has health insurance, you probably all have a different plan, and every one of your plans probably pay a different amount on whatever different procedure this is. And so for this little procedure that might cost $200, your insurance might pay $250 and yours might pay $150. Well, what am I going to do as a doctor? I'm going to bill $500 and I'm going to get paid whatever the insurance company is willing to pay me on it. And that's what the hospital had done. They upped the price of everything so that they wouldn't leave any money on the table, and the insurance company wrote the check and they were good with it and walked off. Now, if you don't know that and you don't have health insurance, guess what your bill would have been? $189,000. So make sure that you're covered on these things. There's a lot of things that just having the insurance will lower the price of the medical treatment. Make sure you've got it in some form. If you're not using, I think Wendy has MediShare or one of these other systems. It's not really insurance, but at least she's able to get the same kind of discounts when she goes to the doctor that she would would not get without that type of insurance. So use those things for that. This is a good one. My mother used to be guilty of this one. Avoid purchasing huge quantities of things that you'll never use because they're cheaper per unit. You know, you can probably buy a 55-gallon drum of shampoo from Costco, and the per hair wash will be pennies. But you're never going to use a 55-gallon drum of shampoo. And in the end, you just wasted a lot of money. I remember my rat out my mom. When my mother passed away, we had to go through her house, and she had, well, it was shampoo. She'd started buying shampoo from QVC or one of these, things that came in those huge jug-sized bottles, and there were like 8 of these in the shower. How long will it be before that thing runs out? Josh will be a grandfather by the time you need any more of this, and you're probably going to change brand. Don't fall into that idea of going to Costco and when you need a chicken and buy 40 chickens. Just because the per unit price is less doesn't mean that at the end of the day you saved any money. You didn't. You spent more. And when it comes to clothing, avoid fads. This is one that I know would, there's going to come a day when athletes like hockey players and football players are going to want to destroy all of the photos of them wearing those tiny little suits that are in fashion now. I don't know if you've looked at men's suits lately, but it looks like Jeremy would be wearing my clothes. The pants are too short. The sleeves on the jacket don't go all the way down to your wrist. It's 3 sizes too tight, and yet that's fashionable. And they charge through the nose for this stuff. And a year from now, you're going to want to burn it and hope nobody ever saw you wear it. Avoid fads. Stay middle of the road. If you do, you can wear the same clothes for a very, very, very long time and still be fashionable and still look reasonably good without shifting back and forth. Just avoid the fads and stay conservative. You'll save a lot of money. You'll save a lot of money that way. Okay, so minimize expenses. Rule number 5. Let's get through this one. Work hard. Work hard. Diligent labor over time is God's method for prosperity. That's how you're going to get along. Work hard. Go to work and work. And put in the time. Proverbs chapter 26 and verse 16 says, "The sluggard is wiser in his own conceit than 7 men that can render a reason." And look at Ecclesiastes chapter 10. And verse 15. "The labor of the foolish wearieth every one of them, because he knoweth not how to go to the city." One of the things that people tend to get into is the idea of hoping for quick riches rather than just putting your nose to the grindstone and doing the job. Whatever it is that God has given you a talent for, whatever it is that you're able to do, then do that and do it well and work hard and don't worry about the rest. Let the rest of the chips fall where they may. Some people are very good at finance. Well, if that's what you're good at, then that's what you're good at. Do it. But don't expect to get rich overnight, and work hard. Do the job, work hard. Ecclesiastes chapter 10 and verse 18 says, by much slothfulness the building decayeth, and through idleness of the hands the house droppeth through. A lot of people think that they understand this rule, that they should, but they don't. Evidence suggests that they don't really understand what hard work is really all about. They might think they do, but the evidence suggests otherwise. So whatever you have to get to it. Ecclesiastes chapter 9 and verse 10 says, whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with thy might. For there is no work, nor device, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in the grave, whither thou goest. For however much time this idea of retirement, there was a time when my grandparents' time, the only reason you retired was because you just couldn't work anymore. Your body was worn out. But nowadays there's folks, they want to retire when they're 50 years old. I'm 68 now. 50 years old is young. It really is. And the older you get, the more you realize that looking out of these two holes, I don't think I'm any older than I was when I was in my 20s. I have days when I hurt a little bit more, but other than that, you don't notice the world going by like that. And this idea of deciding that when I'm 50, I'm going to quit working, what are you going to do? That's work. Work hard. Find something that you can do that you enjoy doing. If you're able to do that, if you can find work that you enjoy doing and you can make a living at it, it ain't work anymore. So find that and give your time to it. This is something God does not suggest hard work. He commands it. Look at Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12 and verse 11. Not slothful in business, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord. He commands us not to be slothful in business. He commands us to work hard. Ephesians chapter 4. And verse 28, let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him labor, working with his hands the thing which is good, that he may have to give to him that needeth. You think about this. Your work supplies your payment back to God. It supplies savings for yourself. It supplies help for others that are in need. So you see, that's how God expects us to work, so that we can provide for all of those others, for all of those around us, for all of the needs that we have, for all of the needs that God expects us to take care of for others as well. Diligent labor has a promise of many blessings and rewards in Scripture. and in experience. Proverbs chapter 12 and verse 24. Says, the hand of the diligent shall bear rule, but the slothful shall be under tribute. And in Proverbs 22 and verse 29, seest thou a man diligent in his business? He shall stand before kings. He shall not stand before mean men. You know, one of the things that one of the points I've tried to make before, and if you follow this point, it will help you in whatever work that you're doing. God commands us to work. You as a Christian are working. When you do your job, even though you work at whatever place you work at, your ultimate employer is the Lord Jesus Christ. You work as if your boss is the Lord Jesus Christ. You put in a day's labor as if the Lord Jesus Christ is your boss. And you know what it's going to do for you? It's going to help your attitude. It'll immediately give you an attitude adjustment as far as what you're doing. Because if you look at Christ as your ultimate employer, well, it's not going to be quite as hard to put in that day's worth of work knowing that you're doing it for him. Number two, guess what that does for your employer? It helps him, doesn't it? And if every time someone hired someone to do a job, and every time they hired that someone, they hired a Christian, and every time they hired a Christian, they got better work out of them than they ever got out of anyone else. Is that not going to help us all? And is it not going to bring glory to God? And that should be your ultimate aim in this life. God will make sure that we get through it somehow. We'll live through this somehow. Until our time's done, we'll make it somehow. God will provide for that. Our duty is to bring glory to him as often as we can. And one of the ways of doing it is just being the best employee that you can possibly be for the employer, whoever it is that God has put you under for that period of time. And if you do it right, promotion will follow. You take care of God on this, and the rest of everything else will fall into place. But look at it from that standpoint. Consider him your employer and work for him, and don't worry about all the rest of it. Let the chips fall where they may. But at the end of the day, you put in your effort just like your immediate supervisor was the Lord Jesus Christ. And at the end of the day, you will have met the requirement to work hard. Do you know what time I got started? I'm down to rule number 6. I have to admit I am a little bit harebrained right now, and so I'm going to go ahead and break off here for this morning, and we'll pick back up again next week, Lord willing, and go ahead and finish the study next week. When I talked to Elder Mott this week, he suggested that I get a stool. He said that his first week back, he sat in a stool and that it was a lot easier. I looked around, I couldn't find one. Maybe I should have used the trash can. I guess I could have sat on it. But once again, I think he was right. It's kind of a drain. So that said, let's go ahead and stand and be dismissed in prayer for this morning, and we'll come back and take another shot at this next week, Lord willing.